New criticism today of the FBI as investigators say that classified information was found on Hillary Clinton's private server. That's been established. But then they did not recommend any charges against her. FBI Director James Comey, at the time, explained their reason why.
We cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information, or vast quantities of information exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct, or indications of disloyalty to the United States, or efforts to obstruct justice. We do not see those things here.
So he says there was no intent to mishandle and no intent to hurt the country in any way. Those were his two takeaways. Now, Congressman Trey Gowdy says that he doesn't buy that explanation. Here he is with us yesterday.
Remember, James Comey said she was not indicted because he didn't have sufficient evidence on the issue of intent. I didn't see any questions on the issue of intent. There's no question she handled them negligently or extremely carelessly. He said he didn't go forward with charges because she didn't have specific criminal intent. I didn't see any questions on that. She said she did it for convenience, but I didn't see the follow-up questions in the interview I read.
So Thomas Dupree Jr. is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he joins us now. Good to have you with us, sir.
Good morning,
Martha. To you. So, you know, the reason that some people might look at the beginning of this segment and say, well, why is this even coming up again? You know, this is sort of a done deal. But what we're now getting more information on is the FBI interview with Hillary Clinton, which everybody waited months and months for. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Then a couple days later, Mr. Comey came forward and said, we decided that there's no reason to prosecute. So the question is, what questions were asked to Hillary Clinton during that Saturday afternoon interview? So if you were trying to determine whether or not there was any intent to hide the fact that you were harboring classified material, what questions would you ask in that interview?
The sort of questions you would ask are fairly self-evident. You would say, were you aware that there was classified information? Were you aware of the substance of these emails? Why did you set up the email server? What was your intent in doing so? And if these reports are true, these are all curious omissions. I mean, look, prosecutors can build a case in a variety of ways. Often they'll do so through indirect evidence. But in a case like this, you'd think they could have made a direct evidence case by simply asking her, what were you thinking? Did you know it was classified? What was your intent and purpose in doing what you did?
So the main question, it seems to me, from what you're saying and what Chairman Gowdy told me yesterday, is why did you set up the server in the first place? What was the motivation? Why, unlike other former secretaries of state or government officials, why did you establish your own server to do state business on, correct?
That is correct. That's certainly one thing you want to get into, is what was the motive in this very unusual, unique setup. Another question is, were you aware of the substance of the emails? We all know that just because something isn't marked with a big classified banner doesn't mean you can distribute it or make it publicly available at will. And so I think there are a lot of questions that could have been asked, but from what we're hearing may not have been asked, about what Secretary Clinton knew at the time she engaged in all of this activity.
Right. So we need to find out what happened in the FBI interview, exactly how they questioned her, and whether or not they tried to figure out what her intent was, because the reason for not pressing charges was that there was no intent. So when I look back at an exchange between Mr. Comey, who came before the congressional committee very easily just a couple days after he said this, Chairman Gowdy talked to him about how you prove intent. And he said you would prove intent, this is Gowdy, by showing the jury evidence of a complex scheme that was designed for the purpose of concealing the public record. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that's one way you could show intent. And look, I think what's going on here is I think there's a sense among the American public that people need to be reassured that this was a serious, thoughtful, thorough, neutral, independent investigation. And there are all these circumstances surrounding what happened, the mysterious meeting between former President Clinton and the Attorney General on the airplane, that I think call into question exactly what went on behind the scenes. And for that reason, I think it was helpful for Comey to turn over a lot of these investigatory materials to Congress. Right. I think another step he might strongly consider is whether it's possible to make some of this information public, to let the people look at what was asked, what the secretary said, just so they're reassured that this was a fair, neutral process.
Okay, so as citizens of this country, does everyone have a right to see the transcript from the interview? There's no transcript, actually. There are notes that the FBI took while they questioned her. Do we have the right to see that information?
You know, I wouldn't go so far, Martha, as to say that we have a right to see it, because certainly there are all sorts of criminal investigations where you don't make the what went on behind the scenes public. But I think in this case, given the circumstances and given the high public interest and importance in what's going on, I think it would be helpful and I think it would be sensible for them to make more information public.
All right. Very interesting. We'll keep digging on this. Thank you so much, Tom Dupree. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Martha.